Joel Mercer had spent 6 years learning how to carry things quietly. Not boxes, not engine parts. The heavy kind, the kind that settled into your chest somewhere around 3 a.m. when the house was too still and the only sound was your daughter breathing in the next room. After his wife Carrie passed from a brain aneurysm on an otherwise unremarkable Tuesday in February, Joel had become the kind of man who fixed other people's broken things because it was the only work that made the world feel logical. Something was wrong. You found it. You repaired it. It worked again. Grief didn't operate that way, but a transmission did, and that had to count for something. He ran a small electrical and appliance repair shop in Harrowfield, a town of about 4,000 people tucked between farmland and a provincial highway in northern Ontario. The shop had been his father's before it became his. Same hand-painted sign out front, same bell above the door, same coffee maker that took 3 minutes longer than any reasonable person would tolerate. Joel kept all of it exactly as it was, not out of stubbornness, but because some things deserved to stay unchanged. His daughter Emma, 9 years old and extraordinarily serious for her age, did her homework at a corner table every afternoon after school while Joel worked. She had her mother's handwriting and her mother's habit of underlining important sentences twice. On a Thursday in late October, while the first real cold of the season moved in from the northwest, a silver luxury SUV pulled into Harrowfield like it had taken a wrong turn from a different world entirely. The woman who stepped out wore a charcoal coat that probably cost more than Joel's monthly utilities combined. She was perhaps 45, with the kind of composed, sharp expression that came from decades of walking into rooms and being the most important person in them. Her name was Claudine Beaumont. Most people in Canada's business community would have recognized her immediately. CEO of Beaumont Infrastructure Group, a national firm that had built highways, transit corridors, and government buildings from Vancouver to Halifax. She had appeared on the cover of business magazines. She had been profiled in newspapers. She moved through the world as if it had been designed specifically for her schedule. What had brought her to a repair shop in Harrowfield, Ontario, was considerably less glamorous. The built-in control panel for her SUV's seat heating and ventilation system had malfunctioned somewhere between a conference call and the highway exit. It was a minor inconvenience by most standards, but Claudine Beaumont did not accept minor inconveniences gracefully. She had already tried calling 2 dealerships, neither of which could take the vehicle until the following week. Joel listened carefully, asked a few questions, and took a look at the panel. Within 40 minutes, he had traced the fault to a corroded wire connector behind the dashboard. A common issue on that model in cold climates, something the dealerships would have charged twice as much to find and 3 times as long to schedule. He replaced the connector, tested every function, and handed her the invoice. The total was $220. Claudine Beaumont looked at the invoice the way some people look at a parking ticket, with the particular combination of irritation and contempt reserved for things that feel beneath them. She glanced around the shop, at the old workbenches, at the hand-painted sign, at Joel's worn canvas work jacket with a small patch sewn over the left elbow where Emma had quietly repaired TIÅU the previous winter without being asked. $220, she said, not a question, a verdict. Joel told her the rate was standard, that the diagnostic work alone had taken 30 minutes, and that the part was genuine. Claudine set the invoice down on the counter and pulled out her phone, not to pay. To check something, or perhaps to signal that the conversation was already over. "I've had that kind of repair done at dealerships for less," she said. "I'm not paying $200 to a shop I've never heard of for a wire." Joel kept his voice level. He had spent 6 years learning how to keep his voice level. He explained, once that the repair had been completed and tested, that the price reflected the work. Claudine didn't argue further. She simply picked up her keys from the counter, walked back to her SUV, and drove away. The bell above the door rang once as it closed. Emma looked up from her homework. She had heard everything. At 9, she had already developed a precise radar for injustice, the kind that made her furrow her brow and put down her pencil and watch her father's face to see if he was going to be okay. "Dad," she said carefully. "She didn't pay." "No," Joel said. "Are you going to call someone?" He thought about it for a moment, not because he didn't know the answer, but because he wanted to give her the real one rather than a convenient one. "Probably not worth the trouble, sweetheart." Emma frowned. "That's not fair." "It isn't. So why aren't you angry?" Joel set the invoice on the counter and looked at it for a second. $220. It was 3 days of groceries. It was the field trip fee Emma's teacher had mentioned the week before. It was not nothing. "I'm a little angry," he admitted. "But being angry at someone who's already gone just means you're angry alone. Doesn't change anything." Emma considered this with the focused gravity she applied to most things. She didn't look entirely convinced, but she nodded and picked up her pencil again. What neither of them noticed was the gray sedan parked across the street, the kind of car that blended into any background without effort. Inside it, a man named Howard Beaumont sat very still. He was 71 years old. He had founded Beaumont Infrastructure from a single borrowed truck and a government paving contract in 1981, and he had built it over 40 years into something he was genuinely proud of. He was also Claudine Beaumont's father, though he would have been the first to admit that the company had outgrown his vision somewhere around the time Claudine took over, which was not entirely a compliment. He had been in Harrowfield visiting an old colleague when he saw the silver SUV pull into the repair shop. He had recognized it immediately. He had pulled over out of curiosity, and then, for reasons he would think about for several days afterward, he had stayed. He had watched the entire exchange through the shop window. He had seen Joel listen, diagnose work. He had seen Claudine put the invoice down. He had seen her leave, and he had watched the mechanic, the electrician, whatever the right word was, stand quietly in his shop afterward and say something to his daughter that made the child nod slowly and pick up her pencil. Howard Beaumont had grown up in a household where you paid what you owed. It was not a complicated philosophy. You paid what you owed, you told the truth about what you didn't know, and you treated the person fixing your vehicle with the same basic courtesy you'd want if the situation were reversed. He had tried to raise Claudine with the same understanding. Somewhere along the line, something had drifted. He sat in the gray sedan for a long time after the SUV disappeared. Then he made a phone call. The person he called was a woman named Patricia Elwood, who had been his personal assistant for 22 years, and who was, by any honest assessment, more organized than anyone else he had ever met. He asked her to find out everything she could about the man who ran the electrical repair shop in Harrowfield, the one with the hand-painted sign. "What kind of everything?" Patricia asked. "The real kind," Howard said. The following morning, Joel opened the shop at 7:30, as he always did. Emma was already dressed and eating toast at the corner table, her school bag packed and waiting by the door with the same precision she brought to everything. She had written a note to herself on a post-it and stuck it to her pencil case. "Remember science quiz." Joel had seen it and felt the particular ache that comes from watching your child be more organized than you ever managed to be at 38. Around mid-morning, a retired teacher named Douglas Park arrived with a washing machine motor he'd pulled himself and couldn't get working again. Joel spent 2 hours on it, found a failed capacitor, and had it running before lunch. Douglas offered to pay full rate. Joel charged him for parts and a single hour of labor, partly because Douglas was 73, and partly because Douglas had been Emma's substitute teacher the previous spring and had apparently told her she had a gift for mathematics, which Emma had repeated to Joel 3 times since. A young woman named Sandra, he only ever got her first name, came in with a broken rice cooker she had carried on the bus. She looked like she was in her early 20s. She looked like the rice cooker mattered. Joel fixed it in 20 minutes and waved off the payment. She thanked him twice and looked for a moment like she might cry, which Joel found more uncomfortable than the broken appliance. What he did not know was that Patricia Elwood had arrived in Harrowfield at 9 that morning and was sitting in the small cafe 2 doors down from the shop, asking quiet questions of whoever came in for coffee. She was methodical about it. She spoke to the woman who ran the hardware store next door, a contractor who came in for lunch, the school secretary who happened to stop in, and 3 people who mentioned Joel Walker by name without being asked. By early afternoon, she had filled 4 pages of notes. She called Howard at 2 o'clock. "Well," he said. Patricia was not someone who exaggerated. "Consistently good," she said. "Everyone uses the same words. Honest, reliable, fair. A couple of people mentioned that he reduces his rates for seniors without being asked. One woman said he fixed her furnace last January for the cost of parts because she was between paychecks. The school secretary said his daughter is one of the best students in her class, which isn't relevant but felt worth mentioning." Howard was quiet for a moment. "Did anyone have anything negative to say?" Patricia paused. "One person said he undercharges." Another pause. "Is that the complaint?" "That seems to be the only one." Howard looked out the window of his colleague's kitchen where he had been sitting for the past hour with a cup of tea that had gone cold. The fields outside Harrowfield were flat and frost-pale, the kind of landscape that felt honest in the way only winter could manage. "What about finances?" he asked. "The shop?" Patricia's voice was careful. "He's managing, but just. The building needs work. Equipment is old. He had a slow summer. Apparently a larger chain shop opened in the next town and took some business. He's not behind on anything, but there isn't room for a bad month." Howard set down his cold tea. "He never went after my daughter." "No," Patricia said. From what I can tell, he put the invoice on his board and went back to work. There was a long pause. Find out where he banks, Howard said. I want to talk to his bank manager directly and get the paperwork started. For how much? Howard told her. Patricia, who was not easily surprised after 22 years, was briefly and visibly surprised. That evening, Joel walked Emma home along the same route they always took, past the hardware store and the grain elevator and the field at the edge of town where the frost had turned the grass white-silver, and Emma always tried to crunch the largest patch she could find. She had said very little since the afternoon before. He had noticed. She noticed things and then held them quietly for a while before bringing them out, which was something she had in common with her mother. Dad, she said, crunching a patch of frost methodically. If someone does something wrong and nothing happens to them, does that mean it's okay? Joel thought about the question seriously because she was asking it seriously. No. It means they got away with it. Those are different things. Emma crunched another patch. What's the difference? Getting away with something doesn't make it right. It just means nobody caught it. But if nobody catches it. She stopped, started again. Does it matter? To who? Emma looked up at him. To them. Joel thought about Claudine Beaumont driving her fixed SUV down the provincial highway, probably already on a phone call, probably not thinking about Harrowfield at all. I don't know, he said honestly. Some people feel it and some people don't. But it always matters to the person it happened to. Emma was quiet for a moment, then, it matters to me. Joel put his arm around her shoulders. I know, sweetheart. It matters to me for you, she clarified. He held her a little tighter and didn't say anything, because there wasn't anything to say that would be better than what she had already said. That night, long after Emma had gone to bed, Joel sat at the kitchen table, with the shop accounts spread in front of him and a cup of coffee at his elbow. The numbers were not alarming, but they were not comfortable either. The larger chain shop had taken the quick turnaround jobs, the kind of bread-and-butter work that kept a small operation moving in slow months. He had loyal customers. He had his regulars, but loyal didn't always mean enough. He sat with it for a while. Then he closed the folder, drank his coffee, and went to bed, because there was nothing in those numbers that would change by staring at them longer, and Emma's lunch needed to be packed before 7. Meanwhile, in a hotel room in Sudbury, Howard Beaumont sat at a table reviewing the documents Patricia had couriered to him that afternoon. A foundation proposal he had been developing quietly for 3 years, since his second heart attack, if he was being precise about it. The first one had frightened him. The second one had made him thoughtful. The foundation was built around a straightforward idea that Howard had become increasingly convinced was radical only because people had forgotten it was obvious. That the people who kept communities running were rarely the people who got resources, and that this was both wasteful and wrong. He had the money. He had the structure. The lawyers had signed off on everything twice. What he had been waiting for, without quite knowing how to name it, was the right person. He had considered executives he admired, former employees with good track records, leaders he had heard speak at conferences who seemed genuinely motivated by something other than recognition. None of them had felt quite right. He couldn't articulate why until he sat in a gray sedan in front of a repair shop in Harrowfield and watched a man absorb an injustice without rage and then turn to his daughter and explain it without bitterness. That, Howard had found, was rarer than any credential. He reviewed the documents one more time. Then he signed the final page, picked up his phone, and told Patricia to arrange a meeting for the following morning. The next day arrived quietly. Emma went to school with her lunch packed and her science quiz notes reviewed. Joel opened the shop at 7:30, started the slow coffee maker, and began his first job of the day, a dehumidifier for a family that had moved into an older house near the edge of town and were finding the basement less than cooperative. Around 9:30, he heard the bell above the door. He assumed it was Douglas Park, who sometimes stopped in on his way back from the post office. He wiped his hands and turned around. There were 2 people in the doorway. One was a small, precise woman in her 50s carrying a leather folder. The other was an elderly man with silver hair and the kind of posture that came not from arrogance but from decades of standing up straight because it was the right thing to do. Joel didn't recognize him immediately. Then, as the man stepped forward and extended his hand, something clicked. The face from business headlines, the name from infrastructure projects that had reshaped half the country's road systems. "Joel," the man said. "My name is Howard Beaumont. I believe you met my daughter 2 days ago." Joel shook the hand. He kept his expression neutral, though his stomach had done something complicated. "I remember. I imagine you do." Howard glanced around the shop with the unhurried attention of someone who notices things. He saw the framed photograph on the shelf behind the counter, a woman with dark hair and a summer smile standing in a field. He saw the post-it notes Emma had stuck to the edges of her homework table. He saw the invoice still pinned to the board above the desk. "May I sit down?" Joel gestured to the 2 chairs near the window that he kept for waiting customers. Howard sat carefully. Patricia remained standing, her leather folder open, pen ready. "I owe you an apology on behalf of my family," Howard said. "What Claudine did was wrong. I want you to know I'm aware of it." Joel looked at him steadily. He had thought during the previous 2 days about what he would say if he ever encountered anyone from that situation again. He had expected it would not happen. "Thank you," he said. "I appreciate that. I also want to be honest with you about why I'm here." Howard paused. "I've spent the last 2 days asking people in this town about you. I want you to know that so you don't feel ambushed." Joel blinked. "What did you ask?" "Who you are, how you work, what people think of you." Howard leaned forward slightly. "And what I was told consistently and without exception was that you are the kind of man who does the right thing regardless of whether anyone is watching or whether it costs you something." The shop was very quiet. Outside, a truck passed on the highway. "I'm not sure that's worth investigating," Joel said. "On the contrary," Howard said, "it's the only thing I've ever found worth investigating." He nodded to Patricia, who placed the leather folder on the workbench between them and opened it to a document with an official letterhead. Howard let Joel look at it for a moment before he spoke. "3 years ago, I began planning a foundation. Not another charitable fund with a board of directors who attend galas and make decisions by committee. Something real, something focused on the people who actually do the work that holds communities together. Tradespeople, single parents, veterans, seniors in rural areas who can't access services, families that get overlooked because they're not dramatic enough for a headline." Joel was still looking at the document. He turned a page. He turned another one. He reached the last page, and the number printed at the bottom of it stopped him completely. $14 million, he read it again. $14 million. He set the folder down with the deliberateness of a man making sure he didn't drop something. His hands were entirely steady, which surprised him. He stopped. "There's a mistake." "There isn't," Howard said. "Why would you?" Joel looked up. "You don't know me." "I know what I observed," Howard said. "I know what 50 people in this town told me. I know what your bank manager confirmed about how you've conducted yourself financially over 10 years of running a business that never had an easy month." He paused. "And I know that when my daughter left without paying, you didn't post about it online, didn't go after her company, didn't even call the police. You explained it to your daughter and went back to work." Joel sat very still. That's just what you do." "No," Howard said quietly. "It isn't. Most people don't do that. I've watched a great many people over 71 years, and most of them, when treated that way, either collapse or retaliate. You did neither." "I have a daughter," Joel said. "I can't afford to model either of those things." Howard looked at him for a long moment. When he finally spoke, his voice carried something that was not quite emotion, but was very close to it. "That is exactly the reason I'm here." He reached over and tapped the folder. "The $14 million is not a gift. It's not compensation for a $200 invoice. It's the first investment in a foundation that I've been waiting 3 years to find the right person to lead. I'd like that person to be you." Joel stared at the folder. He looked at Howard. He looked at Patricia, whose expression was patient and entirely unsurprised. "I'm an electrician," he said. "You're a person with the right character," Howard said. "Everything else can be learned. Character cannot." The silence that followed was the kind that happens when something irreversible has just been said and both people in the room know it. From somewhere down the street, the school bell rang faintly for the 10 o'clock break. Joel thought, for a reason he couldn't have explained, about Emma crunching frost the previous evening. About the question she had asked him. Does it matter if nobody catches it? And the conversation they had finished without quite finishing. "I'd need to understand what it actually involves," Joel said finally. "The structure. The governance, who I'd be accountable to." "Entirely reasonable," Howard said. "Patricia has everything prepared. We can take as much time as you need." "I'd need it to actually help people," Joel said. "Not just look like it does." "That is specifically what I designed it to avoid," Howard said. "That's why it's taken 3 years." Joel looked at the document one more time. He thought about the slow summer, about the chain shop in the next town, about the folder of accounts he had closed without resolution the night before, about Emma's lunch packed at 6:50 this morning and the post-it on her pencil case, and the way she had said "it matters to me for you" with complete simplicity and no drama. "All right," he said. "Tell me how it works." What happened in Harrowfield over the following weeks was the kind of thing that small towns talk about for a long time afterward, partly because of the scale of it and partly because of the details that surrounded it. Newspapers picked up the story. A business journalist who happened to be covering an unrelated infrastructure story in the region heard about it and wrote a piece that got picked up nationally. For about 2 weeks, Harrowfield, Ontario received a level of attention it had never previously experienced and was not entirely sure it wanted. Through all of it, Joel remained at the shop every day until the legal arrangements were fully complete. He fixed a furnace motor for an elderly couple on Concession Road 9. He replaced a water pump controller for a grain farmer who had been putting it off for 6 months. He stayed open. He answered the phone. He did not behave like a man waiting for his life to change, because he did not think of it that way. He thought of it as keeping his word to the people who depended on him until there was someone else to keep it. Claudine Beaumont heard about it from her assistant, who had seen the news alert and flagged it with a level of uncertainty about whether to mention it that lasted approximately 4 minutes. Claudine sat with the information for a long time. She had spent the past week without thinking about Harrowfield at all. The conference call had run long. The merger review had required 2 additional rounds of revision. She had attended 3 dinners and a keynote and a site visit, and a session with the foundation's communications team, which was a different foundation, her company's own, the one that mostly supported initiatives her board considered strategically aligned. And then she had seen a photograph in the article. A repair shop with a hand-painted sign, a man in a canvas work jacket with a patch on the left elbow, a 9-year-old girl with serious eyes sitting at a corner table doing homework. Claudine had studied the photograph for a long time. She remembered the invoice, $220. She remembered setting it down. She remembered the sound of the bell above the door as she walked out. She had not thought about it since, which she now recognized was itself the most revealing part. She drove to Harrowfield on a Tuesday, alone, no assistant, no company vehicle. She borrowed her neighbor's station wagon, which was 12 years old and smelled faintly of dog, and she drove 4 hours on the highway with the radio off. Joel was under a workbench when the bell rang. He heard footsteps stop near the counter and called out that he'd be 1 minute. When he straightened up and turned around, it took him a moment to place her out of context. Claudine Beaumont looked different without the composed certainty she had worn 2 weeks before. She looked like a person standing in a room they weren't sure they deserved to be in. She placed an envelope on the counter. "I came to pay what I owe," she said, with interest. She paused. "And to say that I'm sorry, not because of what my father did, though I understand the connection, because of what I did and because I know it was wrong." Joel looked at the envelope and then at her. "I treated you as though your work wasn't worth my time," Claudine said. "And the reason I did that is because I've spent a long time measuring value in ways that don't actually make sense." She stopped. There was more she might have said, but she seemed to understand that over-explaining an apology can be its own form of self-indulgence. She waited. "I appreciate you coming," Joel said. He picked up the envelope and set it to one side. "That took something." Claudine looked at him steadily. "Does it?" She paused. "Is there anything I can do?" "For the foundation, I have connections in infrastructure development, municipal relationships. If there are communities the foundation is trying to reach, send an email to Patricia Elwood," Joel said. "She's managing the intake process. I'll make sure she knows to expect it." Claudine nodded once. She looked around the shop again, more carefully this time. She saw the photograph of the woman in the summer field. She saw the post-it note Emma had left on the table that morning, "Ask Dad about Remembrance Day project." She saw the unpaid invoice still on the board. She wondered why it was still there. She almost asked, and then understood, looking at it, that she already knew. "Thank you," she said. "Good luck," Joel said. The bell rang once as she left. Joel stood in the shop for a moment after she went. He looked at the invoice on the board. He unpinned it, opened the drawer beneath the counter, and placed it inside. Then he went back to work. The Harrowfield Community Foundation opened its doors officially 4 months later in a building that had previously been a community center and now smelled of fresh paint and good intentions. Howard Beaumont attended the opening ceremony and sat in the 3rd row because he had specifically requested not to sit in the front. Emma stood beside her father during the ribbon cutting, wearing a wool coat and her most serious expression, which was the same expression she wore for science quizzes and important conversations and things she intended to remember for a long time. The foundation's first year served 340 families across northern Ontario. It funded vocational training for 62 young people in trades programs. It provided transportation support for veterans in underserved rural areas. It established an emergency assistance fund for single parents that was accessed 47 times in the first 6 months alone. On the day of the opening, a local reporter asked Joel what it had been like to go from a neighborhood repair shop to running a $14 million foundation. Joel thought about the question for a moment. He thought about Carrie's photograph on the shelf, about Emma crunching frost on the walk home, about the invoice in the drawer. "I'm not sure it's as different as it sounds," he said. "Something's broken. You figure out what's wrong. You fix it." The reporter wrote that down. Later that evening after the event, Joel and Emma walked home the same way they always did, past the hardware store, past the grain elevator, across the frost-pale field at the edge of town. Emma crunched a patch of frozen grass and thought about something for a while before she said it. "Dad," she said, "remember when I asked if it mattered if nobody caught it?" "I remember." "I think I understand now," she said. Joel looked at her. "What do you understand?" Emma thought about it carefully, the way she thought about most things. "I think it always matters," she said, "even if nobody catches it at the time. Because it changes who you are while you're doing it. And then who you are changes everything else." Joel walked beside her through the frost and didn't say anything for a moment, because there was nothing to say that would be better than what she had just said, and he had learned, in 9 years of raising Emma, that the best thing a person could do when someone got something exactly right was simply to let it stand. "Your mum would have loved that," he said finally. Emma smiled. Not a wide smile, the small, private kind she kept for things that mattered. She reached over and took his hand, and they walked the rest of the way home in the particular quiet that belongs to people who have learned to carry things together.